grateful to introduce you to our two presenters today, our panelists. Abamfo, Atiemo. He's going to be presenting today. His bio is in your pack, so I'd encourage you to have a look at those as he's presenting. His topic today is religion, religious groups and sects, defining religion for legal and administrative purposes in Ghana. And then we have my very good friend and colleague, Oscarine Nokazolo Ndende, sorry. Dr. Ndende, as I know her. Her topic is going to be on South African customary law of succession in a changing society, contemporary law and its effects on religious practice and beliefs. There's only two presenters in this session, so I'll give each one of them 20 minutes and then we'll leave the rest of the time to questions that may come. We'll start off with Professor Atiemo. If you would go, and then once you are done, Dr. Ndende, you can take the floor.
Thank you. Well, as it has been announced, my topic, religion, religious groups and sects, defining religion for legal and administrative purposes in Ghana. Now, what I seek to do in this paper is to try to answer the question, why is there no attempt to define religion for legal and administrative purposes in Ghana, in spite of the profuse use of the term and its various nuances in constitutions and other official documents since independence? Now, I argue, drawing illustrations from what I call three crisis points in the country's recent history, that there is the need for such a definition or definitions. Now, the last part of the paper would explore the issue of what could be the viable path to such a definition. I conclude that what scholars call polythetic definitions, in the spirit of Wittgenstein family resemblances, which would include elements easily recognizable as religious by the various publics, sophisticated and simple, would be most appropriate in the context of Ghana. Now, why the neglect? Now, this general lack of interest in defining religion for administrative and legal purposes appears to be in continuity with the traditional African holistic view on society. Now, in that context, there is no perceived dichotomy between a secular sphere and a religious sphere. Now then it means, it seems also that the prolonged transition from tradition to modernity and postmodernity has prevented the development of a consciousness of a differentiation in the subsystems of society. It could also be that in a society that is profusely religious, it is taken for granted that everybody knows what is meant when the terms religion or religious are used. Then also it seems authorities have not recognized the many situations which have arisen that have required such a definition. Now, the need for a such definition, that is the need for administrative or legal definitions of religion in Ghana. Now, the compelling need for such a definition or definitions is occasioned by the following factors. Now, the state institutions of the contemporary nation state are secular, and as such, they need to be distinguished and separated from religion. Now, the growing religious pluralism has been accompanied by a competition among religious groups for the privileges and benefits of the secular state. That is oftentimes groups and individuals make claims based on their religious identity. I mean, they put that as the basis of their claim. Then, a clear demarcation between religion and other departments of life will strengthen the neutrality of the state to ensure equity and equality with respect to the privileges extended to groups and institutions that claim to be religious. Then now if we leave the definition of what constitutes religion to popular opinion, then it means we leave too much in the hands of people, to be settled in the context of inter- and intra-confessional equivalence. And for example, in the politics of a growing religious pluralism, dominant traditions sometimes give an inferior status to minority religions by inventing terms or ascribing to them terms such as, say, sect, cult, and even sometimes occult, because they want to assert their own superiority over these groups in the context of competition. Then also, leaving the determination of what is religion or religious to the personal judgment of, for example, internal revenue offices can lead to abuses where there are regimes of exemptions from duties and taxes or even other exemptions. We may also say that failure to say what religion is can lead to the situation where, in the context of the old ethnic states, custom, culture, and religion are lumped together with direct consequences for the religious human rights of practitioners of the indigenous religion. Now, what I mean here is that our former ethnic, pre-colonial ethnic states have now become what we call paramount areas or traditional areas, headed by paramount chiefs. And sometimes within these ethnic states, in the context of the modern political reality, these chiefs and authorities try to assert a minimum kind of autonomy, and then sometimes there is a confusion between the state and what is religion, because it's not clear to separate what they call customary practices from religious practices. So it becomes quite confusing in such a context. And then what happens is that when it comes to situations where the indigenous religion should have benefited from the privileges and other benefits that religious groups are entitled to, the indigenous religious traditions are denied because they are not seen, they are not visible. They are subsumed under the traditional areas. That is what that means. And then also new developments such as proliferation of new religious movement and what I may call religion-like groups and expressions blur the conventional conceptual boundaries. And without clear definitions, the courts and administrators may find it difficult deciding on certain cases. For example, customary practices of the ethnic state, as I have mentioned, are they religious or are they just cultural? Can the ethnic state, for example, impose their practices? In Ghana, for example, there is an issue with what they call ban on drumming or ban on noise making annually, and sometimes it creates tensions between Pentecostal Christians and the traditional state. In one situation, a pastor of a Pentecostal church actually brought out a pistol and chased away traditional authorities going around to enforce those laws. Now, so then, crisis points. Now, what I mean by this is that there have been certain situations in the country in recent times that have called for a clear definition of what religion is. Against the background of this, I want to continue with the rest of the discussions. So what am I seeing here? The first one is the recurrent conflict over custom versus religion in the traditional areas. I've explained what traditional areas mean. Now what happens is that sometimes these traditional authorities, because they are allowed some space in the national constitution to apply their customary laws, sometimes they want to enforce laws that are explicitly religious, or at least are seen by Christians as religious. And then Christians come up to say that, well, we cannot comply with these directives because they conflict with our own faith, and then it is meant to take away from us our freedom to religious expression. And then it becomes dicey, because the traditional authorities want to say that no, this is not religion at all. This is a custom, and it is meant to keep the society together, to keep the harmony of the society. So it is not religious at all. For us, it is part of our politics, and it is secular. Then it becomes contested. In such a situation, it would be very helpful if a clear definition of religion would be given. Now, then the second crisis point, I'm running through it because of time, is the promulgation of the Religious Bodies Registration Law 1989, PNDC Law 221. Now this was a law passed in 1989 by the revolutionary government of the Provisional National Defense Council. And this law required that within 3 months, every religious group in the country should be registered, or you will cease to exist. Now, it was a very controversial law, but I'm interested for our purposes in definitional matters. Now, Section 20 defined a religious body as any association of persons or body or organization which professes adherence to or belief in any system of faith or worship, or which is established in pursuance of a religious objective. Well, as you can see, when it comes to the actual definition of religion, this could not have been very helpful, but okay, this was one of the earliest attempts to define religion, or a cognate term in a state document. Okay, so that's why it is important. Now, as I was saying, this definition was not very helpful because it left so many things in the hands of what we call the Religious Affairs Committee, which was established under the National Commission of Culture to oversee this law. Now, it was this committee who determined what was a religious group or what was not, after a group had submitted its application for registration. Now, for example, even before this law was passed, or as a precursor to this law, the government had outlawed some religious groups already. For example, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was banned. Another group, a local group, was banned. Another church, Church of Jesus Christ of Jowulu, was also banned. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses. So now people were suspicious. What are these people up to? How did they determine that those groups they had already banned were religious or not? So it became obvious that now they were concerned about true religion and false religion. And who was to determine that? And interestingly, the head of the Religious Affairs Committee was a very popular evangelical and Pentecostal leader. So it meant that for them, the definition of religion, or probably true religion or false religion, would be determined by a yardstick from the evangelical Pentecostal quarters. See, that is what it meant. Now, interestingly, it was very obvious that in all these, the government bowed to popular opinion, because it was in a moment of popular agitation against anything that was seen as an old establishment. and then things that were also not familiar. So, for example, the terms sect, cult, and then the occult became so, very profusely used without any attempt to define what they meant. So if a religious group had ethos that they did not agree with what these evangelical and the masses representatives presented, then it was a cult or an occult group or a sect. And these terms were used with derogatory connotations all the time. Okay. So let me, yes, okay, now the third one was the controversy over non-religious gathering versus worship. Now yesterday, Professor Kwashiga told us about the controversy about religious education, religion in our educational institutions, where Muslim groups had gone on protest and all that. Now, when the Ministry of Education had to issue a statement, they said there should be a difference between school gathering and then school worship. Now, the interesting thing is the school gathering, which normally they call assembly, also involves singing of a hymn, some prayers, and a kind of a homily by a teacher. So now it's difficult to say which one is just a school gathering and which one is worship and therefore religious. But then that is also another instance where a definition should be needed. Okay, so let me jump to this slide to conclude. Now, exploring parts of definition. So in this situation, and especially like the situation of Ghana, what parts of definition would we want to tread? Now, when you come to the academic study of religion, there are quite a number of definitions, but then I have looked at what I think are the 8 important kinds of definition, and I've paired them for analytical purposes, so that, for example, we have essential versus operational definitions, substantive versus functional definitions, real versus lexical or stipulative or regulative definitions, and then monothetic versus polythetic, or the family resemblances definitions. Now, the contemporary discussions about these issues are saying that when it comes to define religion, the context is very important. The historical context, the cultural context, and also sometimes the epistemological context is important, as well as the purpose for which you are doing the research or you are doing the writing. So if we accept this, then straight away we can say that essentialist and substantive definitions, I've not had time to explain them, but then these claim universal or cross-cultural validity, and so we may say then they are no longer fashionable to a large extent, so we put them aside. Then when we come to monothetic definitions that hold on to a single element as the only defining element of religion, we find that also quite inadequate because of constant changing in the religious scene. And then when we consider functional definitions, for example, Paul-Tillich's one, it cannot be a very useful one because it is so broad that anything can come into it. Now, this leaves us with lexical, or if you like, stipulative, regulative, and then the polythetic or family resemblances definitions. But then, the first category, the lexical or stipulative definitions can be overly arbitrary because these are kinds of definitions that the scholar resort to for the purposes of their research or their writing. So it can be overly arbitrary. So then we are left with polythetic and family resemblances definitions. And I think that this is what probably I'll recommend for a context such as Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very much.